Hey guys, tonight we begin under the burning sun of ancient Egypt, where sand swirls like golden smoke and the Nile glows silver under the moonlight. You stand barefoot on sun-baked stone, trying to picture what sleep might have felt like without air conditioning, blackout curtains, or a pillow that wasn't, well, a chunk of carved wood. Welcome to the very first slumber party where heatstroke was invited. The mattress was probably just bundled reeds, and mosquitoes were absolutely not optional. You're already sweating, and yes, those are probably flea bites. You're living in a mud brick house with no ceiling fan, no Netflix, and no breathable linen pajamas. Your room smells faintly of onions, don't worry. We'll get to that. And there's a high chance the neighbor's goats are arguing again. If you're lucky, your family's rooftop sleeping mat has been soaked in river water and dried just enough to give a false impression of coolness. And you, poor traveler, are expected to get a restful night's sleep here. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, let me know where you're watching from and what time you're curling up with this. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You glance around your dusty courtyard, eyeing your spot for the night. It's either the roof or the floor, both of which come with distinct advantages and drawbacks. The roof might give you a breeze if the gods are kind, but it's also where the insects have their gladiator tournaments. The floor slightly less windy, but you might have to share it with a chicken or two. Ancient Egyptians weren't strangers to sleep struggles. The land was harsh dry, loud, and alive with biting creatures. Maru. Night brought only minimal relief. Daytime labor under the blinding sun was exhausting, but that didn't guarantee sleep would be easy. Most people didn't have separate bedrooms, just a living space that transitioned into sleep quarters once the cooking fires died down. Privacy was as mythical as the crocodile gods. The heat wasn't your only enemy. Many families shared their homes with animals, cats, goats, even monkeys. And while cats might sound like comforting night buddies, they could just as easily tip over a clay pot or bite your toe in the dark. Plus, the ever-present Nile mosquitoes loved dusk. Egyptian households burned incense and used leafy garlands in the hopes of discouraging them. Sometimes, people even oiled their skin with castor oil or balms to make themselves less delicious. It didn't really work. Now, here's a mainstream fact to frame your discomfort. The average ancient Egyptian home had no internal doors, no glass windows, and very few barriers between inside and outside. Sound insulation zero, structural ventilation. Only if you counted holes in the wall, you roll over on your mat, which is actually not bad, woven from rushes, harvested from the Nile marshes, often cushioned with straw or old cloth. But the pillow is a mystery to modern sleepers, a headrest carved from wood or ivory, shaped like a curved cradle that lifts your neck. It's the orthopedic gamble of ancient design. Some swear by it. Others, well, you wake up with a kink that makes you consider becoming a statue. And now for a little-known tidbit, ancient Egyptians believed that sleep was a tiny rehearsal for death. It wasn't just a break from consciousness, it was a preview. That belief changed how they viewed sleep interruptions. Nightmares were seen as omens or warnings, not just inconvenient brain glitches. And if you talked in your sleep, that could be a spirit trying to speak through you. Sleepwalking. Maybe a god had borrowed your body for a stroll. Better hope it was a friendly one. Historians still argue whether sleep schedules were consistent or chaotic. Some suggest ancient Egyptians followed a first sleep, second sleep rhythm, like many pre-industrial cultures, waking in the middle of the night for prayer, conversation, or a light snack. Others believe their sleep was more dictated by the agricultural grind, early to bed, early to rise, with interruptions chalked up to mosquitoes, dreams, and the occasional divine visitation. You begin to drift off, soothed by the low sounds of frogs croaking from the canal and someone, somewhere, muttering a hymn to Hathor, goddess of joy and motherhood. Perhaps she'll bless you with a dreamless slumber, or perhaps you'll wake to a goat nibbling your sandal again. Let's not worry about that yet. Focus on the reeds rustling in the wind, the rhythmic lapping of the Nile, and the cool hush of desert nights settling in. You wake if you ever really fell asleep to the smell of onions, not cooking onions, just onions, crushed, smeared, raw or stewed. They seem to show up in every aspect of your Egyptian existence, like sand or the judgmental stare of a temple cat. You try to adjust your head on the wooden pillow, which is somehow harder than the stone beneath it. And remember, onions weren't just food here. They were medicine, perfume, spiritual protection, and probably one short step away from being currency. Your host family is already up, busy boiling lentils and baking flatbread in a clay oven out back. One child is applying onion paste to a wound on their foot. Another is chewing a whole bulb like it's breakfast candy. You're pretty sure no one has brushed their teeth since the reign of Ramses II. You breathe through your mouth and try not to faint. It turns out, onions were a big deal in ancient Egyptian medicine. They were believed to increase strength, fight infections, and keep evil spirits out of the body, sort of a vegetable Swiss Army knife. Priests prescribed them for everything from digestive issues to heartbreak. Some mummies were even found with onions tucked into their eye sockets or laid carefully around their necks, because when you're sailing to the afterlife, apparently you bring snacks. Now, here's a mainstream fact for your sleepy mind: the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical texts in the world, includes over 800 remedies, many involving plants like garlic, frankincense, and yes, onions. The ancient Egyptians were meticulous record keepers when it came to treatments, but their science was a blend of the practical and the magical. If your stomach hurt, you might get a poultice and a prayer. On the quirkier side, onions weren't just for the sick. They were fed in bulk to laborers, building temples and tombs. Historians think this wasn't just for the nutrients, it was because onions made people feel full. That bulbous crunch gave the illusion of a meal when resources ran low, and well, they were easier to grow than cows. Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly believed the layered structure of an onion symbolized eternity, or whether that interpretation came later. Some say the circular rings were seen as miniature reflections of the divine order of the cosmos. Others think that's just a poetic modern projection. Either way, you'll never look at your salad the same again. You stumble outside, half awake, where the sun is already burning its brand into the clay walls. Sleep is over for now, and it wasn't exactly rejuvenating. The rooster's been crowing since before dawn, and you could swear one of the oxen gave you a dirty look. You're handed a chunk of sour flatbread and, surprise, a roasted onion. You chew slowly, trying to suppress a burp, and reflect on how many of your body's systems are currently being assaulted. Even bathing didn't provide much relief in this world. You might rinse off in the Nile, if you're lucky, but daily hygiene often consisted of rubbing scented oils on your skin to remove dirt. The wealthier you were, the more elaborate your oils. For everyone else, it was sweat, sand, and maybe a little frankincense if you were blessed. Honestly, the onion smell was probably the least of your problems. Still, the Egyptians had a refined sense of scent. Perfumes were crafted with layers of herbs, resins, and yes, occasionally alliums. One fragrance, kaifi, was made from myrrh, honey, wine, and more ingredients than a modern fruitcake. It was burned in temples to calm the gods and people. They truly believed that certain aromas could lull you into better sleep, clearer dreams, even deeper spiritual states. You squint toward the horizon, where the heat shimmers like molten glass. Somewhere out there, a caravan is kicking up dust, hauling exotic spices from the east. Closer to home, someone nearby is chanting, calling to Bastet or Isis or Thoth, hoping for a good harvest or a safe childbirth. These prayers blend with the hum of insects, the groan of rope lifting a bucket from the well, and the endless whisper of dry wind. Your body craves another nap, but it won't come easily. The rhythm of ancient Egyptian life leaves little time for indulgent rest. There's bread to knead, grain to winnow, hieroglyphs to carve, temples to sweep. Everyone has a role, and your dreams, if you had any better, wait their turn. And yet, there's something charming about this chaos, something gently absurd, like the fact that onions were sometimes offered to the gods themselves, piled high on altars or painted on tomb walls as signs of devotion. Apparently, deities also appreciated the healing power of a good vegetable. As you head back inside to escape the glare, you glance at the household shrine, just a tiny niche in the wall with a painted statue, a bowl of dates, and, of course, an onion. It's half peeled, possibly sacred, possibly someone's snack. You don't ask. You lie down again, this time on a mat in the shade. The air is still thick and heavy, but your limbs begin to relax. A fly buzzes past your ear. Somewhere nearby, a flute plays a slow, circular tune. You exhale, the scent of onions still clinging to your breath like a stubborn ghost. And as your eyes drift shut, you realize in a world built on dust and dreams, even the humble onion had a part to play in the strange, complicated dance of sleep. The sun is lower now, but the air doesn't care. It stays heavy, wrapping around you like a damp wool blanket. You're dragged back to semi-wakefulness by voices low and rhythmic. Chanting, you crawl toward the doorway of your host's house and squint outside. In the distance, a group of priests is moving toward a temple, flanked by wide-eyed acolytes and donkeys that seem thoroughly unimpressed. This is your first glimpse into a religious ceremony dedicated, oddly enough, to Maat, goddess of balance, order, and truth. The ancient Egyptians were serious about cosmic balance. You were expected to uphold it in your work, your worship, and even your dreams. That's right, if your dreams got too rowdy, you could be accused of spiritual disorder. Try explaining that to your boss on a Monday. These priests are particularly concerned with sleep. Why? Because in their world, sleep wasn't just a biological necessity, it was a test. Every night, your ball, one of the parts of your soul, could drift away from your body and walk among the gods, the dead, or, if you were unlucky, the monsters of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Think of it like astral projection meets ancient HR review to encourage the Bia to behave. Many people slept with protective amulets or scribbled spells on their headrests. If you were rich, maybe you had an enchanted figurine tucked beside your mattress. If you were poor, you just crossed your fingers and hoped no shadowy snake demon tried to bite your dream self in half. A mainstream historical detail. Dream interpretation wasn't just casual entertainment. Entire books were written about what different dreams meant. There's one surviving fragment known today as the Ramesside Dream Book. In it, you can learn that dreaming of eating crocodile meat is actually a good omen. Dreaming of drinking warm beer, less good. Dreaming you were a cat, that one's still under review. There were even professional dream interpreters who made a decent living decoding the subconscious for clients. Picture a bearded man in linen robes, squinting at a papyrus scroll and saying, "Ah yes, you dreamed of snakes shedding their skin while balancing figs on their heads. That clearly means your sister-in-law is hiding something. Surprisingly modern. Really." You shuffle back inside and notice something strange near your mat. A bundle of papyrus tied with twine. It's a prayer scroll meant to be read aloud before sleep. The words are faded, but the intent is clear. A wish for protection from demons, restless spirits, and bad dreams. One line reads, "Let no night wanderer pass my threshold, nor foul breath enter my nose." Honestly, same. Of course, not everyone took the sacred route. Some people just drank themselves to sleep. Beer was basically the ancient Egyptian Gatorade, hydrating, caloric, and safer than the Nile water during flood season. for special occasions. A particularly strong brew called heket was served in deep ceramic bowls. Sleep wasn't guaranteed, but a foggy few hours of unconsciousness, absolutely. And then there's the peculiar fringe belief that certain deities could physically visit you in your dreams, especially if you left a decent offering. The god Bes, protector of households and mothers, was known to show up in nightmares, not to scare you, but to scare away whatever was bothering you. He looked like a dwarf lion with a tambourine, because of course he did. Historians still argue whether dream temples, those special sanctuaries where people slept overnight to receive divine visions, were meant literally or metaphorically. Were you truly supposed to nap in a room full of incense and hope Horus dropped by with life advice? Or was it just a poetic way of saying, sleep on it? As night finally slips across the city, your little corner of the world hums with life. Torches flicker, dogs bark. Somewhere a woman sings a lullaby, so slow and low it sounds like the wind. Your body aches in weird places from the hard ground and wooden pillow, but you're getting used to it. Sort of. You lie down and try to recall the words from the prayer scroll, something about banishing shadows. You whisper them, badly, and press your palm against the floor for grounding. The cool clay helps, so does the faint scent of burnt myrrh wafting from the corner. Just as your eyelids begin to droop, you hear a scraping sound. Your host family's teenage son is carefully positioning a painted clay mask on his chest, a homemade ritual to keep his soul anchored during sleep. It's oddly beautiful. Even if the painted eyes look like they're judging your life choices, tonight's dreams might be calm or they might be wild. You've heard stories already of men visited by jackal-headed gods, of women given advice by star spirits, of farmers whose dreams warned them about floods days before the river rose. Most stories end with some cryptic lesson, like never ignore a beetle in your dream, or trust the ibis, not the hawk. Classic. You shift onto your side carefully, so your hip doesn't cramp again, and wonder what your ba will find tonight. Maybe a peaceful garden, maybe a cosmic boat full of flaming snakes, oh, maybe Bes doing cartwheels. It's hard to predict, but that's the thing about ancient Egyptian sleep. It was never just about rest. It was an intersection of the physical, spiritual, and deeply personal. You didn't just tuck in for the night, you prepared, you prayed, and you hoped that whatever dreamland you stumbled into wouldn't require a backup plan. One final gust of wind sweeps through the doorway, rattling the papyrus scroll and extinguishing a candle. Darkness settles, the room quiets, and once again, you drift not just into sleep, but into the layered, onion-scented mystery of dreams that mattered far more than we ever gave them credit for. You wake before dawn, if waking is the right word for what your spine just endured. Your limbs ache, your mouth tastes faintly of last night's incense, and your neck is permanently kinked from the charming yet unyielding headrest. You stretch, if creaking slightly counts as stretching, and shuffle outside into the blue-gray stillness of early morning in ancient Egypt. And this, dear traveler, is when the rituals of the day begin, not the glamorous ones with golden idols and chanting priests, but the quiet, daily ones sweeping thresholds, offering food to gods, and most curiously rubbing perfume into your scalp while still half asleep. That's right, perfume wasn't just for evenings or royal banquets. Ordinary Egyptians, especially the middle class, often started their day by applying scented oils or wax cones made from animal fat, resin, and herbs. These cones would melt slowly throughout the day, releasing pleasant aromas while simultaneously keeping flies at bay. Sleep might have been patchy, but at least you smelled semi-decent while enduring it. One of the most fascinating details you discover as you observe your host family is how much care they put into what happens before the first bite of breakfast. A small plate of offerings bread, figs, and yes, A slightly desiccated onion is placed at the household shrine. This isn't optional. It's their morning insurance policy. Give a little to the gods, and maybe they'll let you get through the day without a locust swarm or sprained ankle. You kneel beside the shrine and peek at the painted face of Hathor, goddess of music, joy, and sleep. She smiles with that fixed, divine serenity that seems to say, I watched you snore last night. You nod respectfully. She knows things. Here's your mainstream fact of the morning. Most homes in ancient Egypt had a household god or two they favored. While the grand temples were reserved for official deities like Amun or Ra, inside their humble mud brick walls, families might worship Tauret, a pregnant hippo lady who guarded childbirth. Best yes, him again, or even a local river spirit. Religion wasn't just national, it was intimate, woven into cooking, cleaning, and dreaming. And speaking of cleaning, ever tried brushing your teeth with a stick dipped in natron and crushed charcoal? It's exactly as fun as it sounds. Ancient Egyptians were particular about oral hygiene, probably because their bread contained enough sand to erode enamel, like wind erodes statues. You give it a try. It's minty in the way that licking an old pyramid might be. Fringe fact time. Did you know natron, the salty, soda-rich mineral used for cleaning, mummification, and temple purification, was also applied to the skin as a deodorant? You dab a little on your wrists and instantly regret it. It's like sprinkling a beach sand under your arms and pretending it's lavender-scented lotion. Now, a historian's headache, scholars still argue whether the wax perfume cones were purely ceremonial or part of daily hygiene. Many artistic depictions show partygoers wearing them, but no actual physical cones have survived. Were they real or symbolic? Were the artists just getting creative with the visuals? The debate continues. Somewhere out there, an archaeologist is still holding a broken perfume jar and whispering, "Prove me wrong." Back inside, your host family is preparing for a long day. The youngest child mumbles something about bad dreams and is handed a tiny amulet. In response, a carved frog, symbolizing rebirth and protection. You're offered a sip of warm beer and a crust of honeyed bread. Not quite a cappuccino, but you nod politely and chew. As your sluggish body adjusts to the rhythms of a society that wakes with the sun, you start to notice something strange. The day feels lighter, calmer, somehow more deliberate than your usual mornings. There's a built-in gentleness to Egyptian routine, a quiet respect for balance. Everything from the food to the daily prayers to the soft hum of the market seems arranged to preserve harmony. Even sleep, odd as it is here, plays a role in that harmony. You're told that if someone wakes from a nightmare, they might visit a priest or scribe and have it transcribed, read, and cured with a spell. Think of it like ancient therapy, only instead of journaling. You pay a guy in linen to draw a snake being crushed under Ra's solar boat. You sit for a while in the cool shade of the courtyard, watching as neighbors sweep the dust from their doorways in synchronized patterns. One woman hums a lullaby to her baby, even though it's morning. The rhythm calms the child, it calms you too, and for a brief moment, with your back against a clay wall, the scent of crushed mint drifting from a nearby cooking pot, you feel something close to restful, not asleep exactly, but still held, as if this ancient place, for all its hardships and strange onion rituals, knew something about balance that we've long since forgotten. The light creeps up the wall, gold and bold. Children run past with wooden toys, merchants call from down the street, and a cat lands noiselessly in the dust beside you. She blinks, stares, and walks off without concern. You exhale. It's going to be a long day, but tonight, when you curl up again beside that awkward pillow, when you smear oil behind your ears and mumble a spell to keep demons at bay, you'll know the strange, quiet rituals of sleep in Egypt don't begin at night. They begin with the very first yawn. You shuffle through midday Egypt in a light linen tunic that clings just enough to remind you it's about 104 degrees and there is no such thing as deodorant as you know it. The sun hangs like a blister overhead, casting everyone in shadowless clarity. But what really strikes you now, after the slow ritual of the morning, is just how many people are trying not to be awake. No one tells you this, but you start to notice the clues: a fisherman dozing under the hull of his half-finished boat, an older woman weaving reeds with her eyes half shut, even a scribe tucked into the corner of a temple wall, stylus frozen mid-scroll as his head lolls back ever so slightly. And just like that, you've stumbled into one of ancient Egypt's most underappreciated secrets, the sacred midday nap. Historians still argue whether it was an institutionalized part of the day or simply a response to oppressive heat, but the evidence is pretty compelling. Letters written between workers on royal tombs show mid-afternoon gaps in labor logs, big gaps. One ostracon, that's a pottery shard used as scratch paper, includes a laborer's excuse for missing work that translates roughly to too hot, felt unwell, stayed home and slept. A relatable king. And here's your mainstream fact. The construction of royal monuments, like the Valley of the Kings, followed a seasonal schedule heavily dictated by temperature and daylight. Labor was divided into manageable shifts, and midday rest was more common than most modern schedules allow for. Sleeping on the job wasn't laziness, it was self-preservation. You dip under an awning next to a vendor selling dates and tamarind juice and lean against a basket of something vaguely pickled. The vendor, clearly in no rush, fans himself with a woven palm leaf and tells you about his father, who used to nap standing up with his back against a fig tree. Practice, he says, nodding seriously. You believe him. The heat has a way of melting your resolve and dulling your thoughts into something soft and swimmable. And here's a quirky bit: ancient Egyptian physicians actually recommended sleep as a treatment for stomach problems, headaches, and you guessed it, spiritual imbalances. If your ka, or life force, felt off-kilter, one suggested remedy was to sleep in a temple and wait for a healing dream sent by a god. No pressure, though. These were known as dream incubations, and they weren't reserved for priests or prophets. Ordinary folks might travel to special sleep sanctuaries in places like Abydos or Saqqara, seeking nighttime visions that would deliver divine diagnoses or healing instructions. Imagine combining your doctor's office and a psychic dream booth and then being expected to interpret the results using hieroglyphs. You find yourself dozing a little against the wall, and someone drapes a cloth over your head to keep the flies off. Not out of charity, necessarily more like communal wisdom. Everyone's a bit sleepy, so kindness flows a little easier. That's the thing here. Sleep isn't seen as weakness. It's a part of life's sacred rhythm. In the Book of the Dead, restful sleep is one of the privileges of the virtuous soul. Even in death, Egyptians wanted to be well rested, which brings us to the fringe tidbit of the hour. Certain tomb inscriptions request that the deceased be allowed to sleep without being disturbed by the noise of the living. Yep, eternal rest wasn't just poetic, it was a literal architectural priority. Some tombs even had sound-blocking corridors or were placed far from urban centers because nobody wants their afterlife ruined by someone's goat cart rattling past. You stumble back out into the light and find yourself in a workshop district where artisans are carving alabaster and assembling chairs that look suspiciously uncomfortable. One of them stops to stretch, yawns loudly, and says something about how dreams are where the gods whisper. You want to ask if he means dreams during sleep or just daydreams, but he's already wandered off to find some shade. And as the sun begins to dip just slightly, just enough to tease, you realize that Egypt isn't just a place, it's a rhythm, and woven deep inside that rhythm is the understanding that rest is a sacred act, that sleep, even the kind stolen in bits beneath a tree or behind a spice cart, is part of the cosmic balance. You think of all the modern advice about sleep hygiene, blue light limits, no caffeine after 3 p.m., perfect pillow angles, and then you look around at a society that seems to intuit rest rather than overthink it. Sure, they had sand-filled mattresses and stone pillows, but they also had whole institutions devoted to dreaming. Kind of evens out, doesn't it? A passing child offers you a piece of dried fig and then giggles when your lips pucker. It's as bitter as midnight thoughts. You chase it down with water from a clay jug, warm but refreshing, and it hits your stomach like a lullaby. By the time the shadows lengthen and the city begins to stir again for evening chores and offerings, you feel as though you've been gently braided into the tempo of things, like your heartbeat has slowed to match the Nile's flow. Lazy and patient, you'll sleep again soon, not because it's bedtime, just because it's time. The evening in ancient Egypt doesn't descend, it seeps in, like date syrup into warm bread. You watch the sunlight stretch thin across the horizon, diluting itself into soft peach and gold tones that coat every mud brick wall and cluster of palm fronds. The village moves with a different energy now, like someone has gently lowered the volume of the day. You wander toward the rooftops, where a few families have dragged mats and baskets up for dinner. Roofs here aren't just for escaping floodwater, they're extended living rooms, cooler and breezier than the crowded quarters below. From this height, you can see the Nile glinting lazily in the distance, its banks scribbled with the silhouettes of herons and fishers pulling in their last catch. Now, before we go any further, yes, onions again. The evening meal, though humble, is not lacking in flavor. A stew simmers in a clay pot, lentils, leeks, garlic, and, naturally, onions. The scent is savory and oddly sweet, wafting into the cooling air like a sleepy lullaby for your taste buds. You're handed a bowl and tear off some flatbread, with fingers now so dusty they might be part of the archaeological record. Here's your mainstream fact: to chew on onions were used in nearly everything, from food to medicine to religious offerings. They were believed to hold magical properties, partly because their layered structure symbolized eternity and the afterlife. Some mummies were even buried with onions tucked into their eye sockets, a crunchy passport to the next world. Apparently, your host family eats slowly, without urgency. Meals aren't just fuel, they're punctuation marks in the day. After the chaos of noon, this is a comma, a breath. You sit back and listen to the casual stories, the quiet laughter. A girl hums a tune while absent-mindedly drawing spirals in the dust with a fig stem. And then comes the fringe fact: certain Egyptian recipes called for mixing beer with mashed onions to treat sleepwalking. That's right, beer-onion therapy. The mixture was meant to be drunk, or in some cases, rubbed onto the soles of the feet before bed. It's unclear whether the goal was to cure the sleepwalking or simply knock you unconscious with sulfurous funk. Historians remain unsure. As you digest, you watch the stars begin to blink into view, one by one, as if summoned. Ancient Egyptians were passionate stargazers, not just because of navigation or religion, though those played a role, but because the sky told stories, real ones. In their view, Sirius, the dog star, was sacred to the goddess Isis, and its rising each year marked the start of the Nile's flooding season. The sky was a kind of sleepy oracle. Lay back, and it might whisper something to you. Below, the neighborhood grows quieter still. Crickets begin to trill, and the last of the street merchants roll up their mats. Somewhere, a dog barks at a goose who frankly had it coming. You notice that no one seems especially anxious about bedtime. There are no alarms to set, no blue light filters to toggle. People simply fade into their sleepiness like they fade into the evening gently, unhurriedly. That's not to say they never had sleep issues. In fact, here comes your scholarly debate of the evening. Some Egyptologists argue that the recurring spells against insomnia found in magical papyri suggest sleeplessness was a common complaint. Others think the references are more symbolic spells meant to ward off spiritual unrest, not actual tossing and turning. Either way, the idea that sleep was vulnerable, that it needed protection, runs deep. Before heading to bed, many Egyptians recited protective charms. Some even placed amulets under their pillows, tiny scarabs, miniature hippos, crocodile figurines carved from soapstone. Cute, right? Until you remember that many of these creatures were symbolic guardians from the chaotic forces of night. You wander back down into the sleeping quarters, careful not to trip over a snoring goat tethered near the stairwell. Your sleeping mat has been unrolled beside the family's, and someone has left you a sprig of myrrh tied with twine, a scented nod to dream safety. You lie back. The roof above you is open to the stars, and the night air smells of baked clay and distant river reeds. Somewhere nearby, a lute strums a tune so slow and quiet it could be mistaken for a heartbeat. You feel the pull of sleep, heavy but gentle. There's no need to count sheep here, just stars, just slow, ancient breaths from a time when sleep wasn't conquered by ambition or caffeine, but honored as part of the human rhythm. You close your eyes and let it all carry you, onions, stars, and all. You're woken not by an alarm, but by a soft stirring breeze that smells like crushed herbs and morning fires. Somewhere, a rooster announces the new day with the enthusiasm of a lead singer who's been practicing all night. The sun hasn't quite risen, but already the household is bustling with quiet activity. Someone is sweeping the courtyard. Another is grinding grain with a rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape that feels oddly like a lullaby in reverse. You sit up slowly on your reed mat, spine complaining mildly, like, really this again? But there's something to be said for sleeping close to the earth. Your joints might grumble, but your lungs feel clearer than a temple's prayer chamber. The day begins not with emails or traffic, but with incense. A bit of frankincense is tossed onto a glowing coal, sending a wisp of sweet smoke skyward. It curls through the air like a blessing, like the breath of a god who forgot to whisper good morning. Religious rituals were woven into daily life here, not separate, not scheduled, just embedded, much like sleep. Now, here's your mainstream fact in ancient Egypt. Dreams were serious business. Not haha, I dreamed I was late for math class business, but full on. This could be a message from the divine business. There were entire dream manuals that people consulted, interpreting symbols like snakes, rivers, or teeth falling out. Spoiler, if your teeth fell out in a dream, that probably meant someone in your family was going to do something embarrassing at a public festival, or worse, forget the onions. Dream interpreters called Sesh Sedjem were consulted regularly. They weren't just spiritual advisors, but held an odd mix of social roles, part therapist, part oracle, part neighborhood gossip collector. Imagine someone telling you, yes, your dream of drowning in honey means your cousin is definitely up to something. As you munch on your breakfast flatbread, dipped in a mushy mix of dates and beans, you listen to one of the elders recount a dream from the night before. In it, he saw a baboon riding a crocodile down the Nile. Everyone nods sagely, as if that's the most natural mode of transport they've ever heard of. The village midwife declares it a good omen for the harvest. Someone else mumbles something about too much onion beer again. But now we wander into the realm of the fringe. Certain temples had designated sleep chambers where individuals could undergo incubation, a ritual sleep intended to provoke visions from the gods. Think of it as Airbnb, but with more sacred statues and fewer towels. The Temple of Serapis, for instance, was known for this. Worshippers would sleep within the temple's inner sanctum, hoping to be visited by the deity in dreams. Whether these dreams were truly divine or simply brought on by the warm stone floors and heavy incense is, well, that's up for debate. And so we hit tonight's scholarly squabble. Some historians argue these dreams were partly induced by mild hallucinogens, perhaps lotus-infused teas or herbal inhalants that aided the spiritual experience. Others maintain that the power of suggestion, ritual, and sleep deprivation alone could produce visions vivid enough to inspire belief. You know, like when you binge watch documentaries and start dreaming you're in a Cold War submarine. As the sun climbs higher, so does the noise. Chickens scatter across the dusty courtyard, children dart between errands, and the men begin their walk to the fields, tools slung over their shoulders like sun-worshipping commuters. But even now, sleep isn't entirely banished. Nap culture here is strong around midday. When the sun becomes a personal vendetta from the gods, people pause, not just to eat, but to nap, usually on shaded rooftops or cool floors. It's a good time to lie low. Literally, you find a shady corner beneath an awning of woven reeds and curl up again. You close your eyes and your body sighs. The world hushes. A few flies buzz in lazy loops. A camel groans somewhere in the distance, like it's narrating your dreams. It's easy to forget, in a world without clocks and deadlines, that sleep is not a luxury. It's just part of the day's landscape, like sand dunes or temple walls. The villagers aren't being lazy, they're being wise. They listen to their bodies, something modern humans treat more like an annoying roommate than a source of ancient wisdom. And as you drift into a second sleep, brief but sweet, you remember that even pharaohs had dedicated dream priests. These weren't palace therapists. They were trained specialists who recorded royal dreams on papyrus scrolls and deciphered them for omens. Imagine your weird nap thoughts being archived in a golden chamber. Today, His Majesty dreamed he was a goose. Interpretive consensus expansion of naval power imminent. You wake to the scent of roasted barley and the sound of a pot bubbling on the fire. The day resumes. But that nap, short, humble, stolen, has refreshed you more than hours of modern screen scrolling and blue light regret. And somewhere in the back of your mind, the image of a baboon on a crocodile is still paddling gently down your subconscious. The Nile glitters like a snake sunbathing in the late afternoon heat. You walk along its edge, sandals squelching in the damp clay, and the air is syrupy with humidity and the faint, peppery smell of papyrus reeds. You're following a procession, not a grand festival, not a royal parade, just a group of common folk heading to one of the many sleep temples. Their pace slow and almost reverent. They carry offerings, onions of course, lotus blossoms, small clay amulets shaped like eyes, frogs, or little beds. Yes, miniature beds. Because tonight, sleep is a sacred act. You'd think sleep might be boring for the gods, but not in Egypt. Some deities specialize in dreams and slumber. Take Bes, for instance. He's not the usual sleek, poised figure. No, Bes is squat, bearded, has the kind of face that would startle you awake, not lull you to rest, but he's beloved, protector of sleep, childbirth, and households. People carved his image on headboards and painted him above cradles. Think of him as a divine nightlight with a dad bod and excellent dance moves. You pass by homes where families have set out charms at their thresholds. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptians believed in actively protecting their sleep, not just falling into it, but warding off bad spirits, dreams, and nocturnal mischief makers like demons and malicious gods. They had lullaby spells, actual written down verses intended to soothe children and chase away the night's shadows. Some of them, translated today, sound oddly modern. Sleep, child, sleep. The lion will not eat you. The crocodile stays in the river, slightly more intense than Rockabye Baby, but you get the idea. A lullaby is sung as you walk by, and it's both strange and sweet, half prayer, half poem, crooned in the twilight. You can't help but hum along. You don't know the words, but the feeling is there. It's universal, like a sleepy yawn passed from mouth to mouth. Now for a fringed tidbit, onion-stuffed pillows. Yes, really. In some regions, people filled their sleep cushions with dried onion skins. Why, no one's entirely sure. Some say it helped with breathing or headaches. Others claim it kept evil spirits at bay. It definitely kept friends at bay. Though, imagine trying to whisper secrets on a bed that smells like a salad bar. But hey, when your life is ruled by invisible forces, a little pungent insurance can't hurt. You reach the temple as the stars prick into view above. The processional fades into quiet footsteps and the shushing of fabric against stone as people lay down for their ritual sleep. The floor inside is cool, smoothed by centuries of sandals and incense smoke. You pick a corner, roll out your mat, and stare at the ceiling. Fresco Nut, goddess of the sky, arched over you with her star-freckled body, cradling the world in her celestial belly. She was said to swallow the sun at night and birth it again each morning, a cosmic yawn and stretch routine. And here comes the scholarly debate. Did temple sleep actually produce visions, or was the power of communal belief and environment doing the heavy lifting? Historians still argue whether the people truly believed the gods entered their dreams, or whether the psychological impact of a holy setting and ritual repetition merely helped them access deeper layers of their subconscious. In other words, was it divine intervention or ancient group hypnosis? With better lighting, you lie down, and the atmosphere shifts. The temple doesn't sleep in silence. There are chants, soft, continuous, almost like background music. You catch the repeated word Hetep, peace, the Egyptian equivalent of shalom or namaste, a word that doesn't just mean peace, but balance, harmony. Sleep isn't just rest here, it's equilibrium. A return to the primordial waters of noon, the chaos that existed before the world, before sound, before alarm clocks and to-do lists. Someone lights a bit of kaifi, a sacred incense made from honey, wine, raisins, frankincense, and about 9 other things that sound like a medieval pantry. The scent unfurls like velvet. It's cloying, rich, calming. You inhale, and it's like drinking twilight. This isn't sleep as you know it. There's no rush, no checking your phone one last time. The temple attendants make sure of that, though instead of confiscating smartphones, they simply hum ancient lullabies and sprinkle lotus petals across the floor. You close your eyes. For a moment, you float. Your body, anchored by gravity and time, feels feather light. Your mind drifts not into nothingness, but into color, into murky visions shaped by incense and chanting and the half-remembered dreams of others who've slept here before you. It's a communal slumber, layered across centuries. You dream someone else's dream, a desert where onions grow on trees and the rivers flow with perfume. When you wake, the room glows with pre-dawn light. The first birds are trying out their morning melodies, mostly off-key, but enthusiastic. Someone coughs nearby. Another person snores softly, still wrapped in the temple's embrace. You rise, not fully remembering the dream, but sensing its shape like a sand sculpture that's been smoothed by wind. The priest by the door hands you a small clay token, a frog, symbol of rebirth. Sleep well, he asks, not because he doubts, but because it's polite. You nod, and behind your eyes, a baboon on a crocodile paddles gently once more. You wander from the temple, still half-drenched in that dream haze where incense clings to your tunic and the world feels just a little out of sync, like a record playing a few RPMs too slow. It's early morning in ancient Egypt, but you're not heading back to the Nile or the onion markets just yet. No, today you're joining someone even more elite than a pharaoh, a scribe, the real MVPs of ancient life, because while kings ruled and farmers sweated, scribes wrote things down, and that, in this world, is a superpower. Your guide is already hunched over a scroll, squinting at the hieratic script by the dim light of a flickering oil lamp. He's been awake for hours, ironically obsessed with documenting everything except the process of falling asleep. You'd think someone with that much access to papyrus would have left behind a journal or two about their bedtime routine, but alas, personal diaries weren't exactly a trend. Still, from their records, letters, and poetry, You can stitch together a surprisingly detailed look at sleep among Egypt's lettered class. Mainstream historical fact: first scribes were trained from childhood in reading, writing, and basic mathematics, often living in temple schools where discipline was, let's call it motivational. They worked for nobles, government officials, or temples, keeping track of everything from taxes to tomb blueprints to, dream interpretation manuals. That's right, there were entire dream books listing common dreams and their supposed meanings, like, if you dream of eating a white onion, you will be protected from betrayal. But what if you dream of peeling the onion or crying over one? Unclear. The onion remains mysterious. As the day warms, your scribe friend scribbles notes about grain deliveries and cattle losses. But now and then, he reaches for his small pouch of dried herbs. A sniff here, a sprinkle there. This is your quirky fringe tidbit, a blend of blue lotus, frankincense, and, yes, ground onion seeds. When mixed into wine, it was said to produce not just sleep, but euphoric, almost trance-like dreams. Some scholars think the Egyptians were using these mixtures as mild sedatives or even hallucinogens, especially in ritual or temple contexts. You start to wonder if that crocodile on a paddleboard dream might have been chemically assisted. Sleep, after all, wasn't a private affair in this world. It was often communal. Families, servants, even guests might all sleep in the same room. Beds, if you were wealthy, were wooden frames with woven string supports, topped with mats or linens. But most people, they slept on simple straw pallets or even straight on the floor, maybe with a clay pillow, basically a ceramic neck rest that looks more like a minimalist shoehorn than anything nap-worthy. And here comes our scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these headrests were actually comfortable or symbolic. Some believe they were purely utilitarian, keeping one's head elevated in a hot climate, away from bugs and scorpions. Others think they had religious significance, designed to keep the sleeper's skull aligned for spiritual reasons, or even to help protect the soul from nighttime danger. Either way, if you're imagining the world's most awkward power nap, you're not far off. Your scribe shows you his own, a delicately carved alabaster headrest shaped like two lotus flowers. It keeps the nightmares away, he says with a shrug, like someone who's tried everything from herbal tea to counting hippos. He sets it beside his bed mat, already preparing for the coming night. Because for all their education, scribes weren't immune to sleep anxiety. If anything, their constant awareness of omens and signs made them more prone to nighttime overthinking. You leave his quarters and step into the inner city as dusk begins to settle, and you notice the quiet little rituals that mark the transition to sleep. Lamps are trimmed, incense cones are lit, cats curl in doorways, and children press their faces into their mother's shawls. This isn't just downtime, it's a societal shift, a whole civilization slowing its heartbeat at once. And still, everywhere, the onion shows up, crushed and added to sleep bombs, chopped into stews meant to be settling before bed, even dried and braided into garlands believed to ward off evil dreams. You wonder if ancient Egyptians ever just got sick of the smell, but no one complains, probably because they didn't have TikTok to suggest lavender instead. There's a brief flash of humor as a neighbor argues with his wife over the best position to hang their anti-nightmare amulet, a carved stone shaped like a hedgehog. The hedgehog sees the snake. He insists. She rolls her eyes. It's domestic life. 1300 BCE edition. You tuck into a guest bed offered by a kindly baker whose sourdough smells like home, even though it's 2 millennia too early for that. His headrest is basic wood, carved with a sleepy baboon. He lights one last lamp and says, "May best guard your dreams." You try to remember how to say "you too" in ancient Egyptian, but just nod politely. As you lie there, the night begins to whisper. Somewhere outside, a cow lowing. In the corner, a cat licking its paw, in the back of your mind, the quiet chant of dream interpreters cataloging your unconscious. Crocodile means change, onion means protection, baboon means mischief, but sleep comes anyway, steady and warm and deeply ordinary, because despite all the rituals, amulets, herbs, and oddly hard pillows, sometimes sleep is just about letting go. Even for the most precise of scribes, you wake to the dusty quiet of dawn, still nestled on that stiff wooden bed frame with a hedgehog charm tickling your elbow. The baker is already gone, off to his ovens, and the house smells like hot grain and burnt chaff. You stretch carefully, because apparently even ancient mattresses could cause pinched nerves, and shuffle your way out to the street. But you're not heading to the palace or the temple or another onion bazaar. Today, you're heading into the fields. Yes, my friend, you're going to spend a day with the people who made ancient Egypt run: the farmers, the laborers, the salt miners, the guys no scribe ever spelled correctly on the first try. These are the people who understood sleep on a bone-deep level, because when you're dragging a plow through the Nile mud, bedtime isn't a luxury, it's survival. By now, you've learned that sleep in Egypt wasn't a fixed thing. It followed the rhythms of the sun, the flood, the work. For farmers, that meant something closer to biphasic sleep, waking well before sunrise, working until the heat peaked, then napping under a sycamore for a few hours before returning to the field, and then crashing after nightfall. There was no 8 hours of solid rest agenda, more like get what you can. When the crocodiles aren't watching, you trudge alongside a small team of farmers dragging an irrigation sled through knee-deep mud, your sandals long since lost to the sticky earth. They're chanting in rhythm, both to keep pace and to stay awake. One of them, an older man with one sandal and zero shame, slaps you on the back and says, "You sleep like the dead." You thank him, assuming that's a compliment. And here comes our mainstream fact. These agricultural workers were the backbone of Egyptian economy, tied to state-run granaries, obligated to give up a portion of their yield to the government, and occasionally volunteered for public works like pyramid construction. Contrary to popular belief, those laborers weren't slaves. They were often paid in beer, bread, and yes, onions, which explains why the stuff shows up in everything. You kind of want to brush your teeth with aloe and scream into a linen towel at this point. But now, let's get to the quirky tidbit. Some laborers believed that sleeping near a freshly dug irrigation trench, specifically one that had seen the moonlight, would give you prophetic dreams. It was like nature's version of a dream pillow, only wetter and more mosquito-infested. Still, people swore by it. The dreams might be obscure, full of scorpions turning into women or fish walking on land, but those were considered valuable insights, possibly a divine nudge about which field to plant next, or, just a side effect of drinking onion wine. After a mid-morning break where you chew on some date cakes and marvel at your own sunburn, the conversation turns to a problem every human has faced since forever sleeping through noise. A young farmhand, maybe 13 years old, confesses that he hasn't slept well in days, too many frogs croaking near his house. His solution, he stuffed papyrus reeds with dried garlic and burned them in his doorway like a sleepy smokescreen. The frogs hate it, he says, eyes wide. So do my sisters. You assure him that science is probably on his side, if only emotionally. This leads to our scholarly debate of the day. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians had designated sleep times enforced by cultural expectations, or if their schedules were entirely fluid. Some evidence suggests a kind of social sleep etiquette: don't disturb elders, don't sleep facing west, the land of the dead, and avoid napping under a tamarisk tree unless you want a ghost to whisper in your dreams. Others argue that the Nile lifestyle was too flexible and seasonal to pin down any one rule. As the sun arcs higher, the farmers retreat into the shadows of their reed shelters to nap. You lie beside them, face pressed into the earth, wondering if this is how dreams start or end. Overhead, a kite circles lazily. One man snores, another murmurs something about onions and turtles, maybe a recipe, maybe a prophecy. When you wake again, it's late afternoon. You join the workers for a drink of barley beer, thick, sour, and served in communal jars. They joke that it helps with sleep, especially when you've got 6 blisters and a bruised ego. One of them tells a story about his cousin who fell asleep standing up in a granary once and got mistaken for a statue of Osiris. The resemblance was not flattering. The workday ends as the sky begins to bleed gold and indigo. The group drifts back to their homes, chatting in low voices, their bodies heavy with exhaustion, but still laughing. You walk with them, noting how their houses are small and densely packed, but smell of cumin, smoke, and occasionally wet linen. One older woman invites you into her courtyard, where several mats have already been laid out for the evening's rest. The stars peek through a canopy of palm leaves. Glorious. Children settle in close to their parents, who hum old songs and tap rhythms against their knees. There are no doors here, only low walls and curtains, and you wonder how anyone sleeps without at least a lock. But no one seems worried. They have each other, and that's safety enough. The woman hands you a thin cloth soaked in myrrh oil and gestures for you to rest your head. It smells warm and bittersweet, like sun on stone. She warns you not to sleep with your feet pointing west. It's bad luck. Apparently, you nod and curl yourself in the opposite direction, tucking the cloth behind your neck. And as the night draws closer, you realize something peculiar. These people, exhausted though they are, honor sleep, not as an inconvenience or a weakness, but as a sacred rhythm, as necessary and revered as the Nile itself. A nearby boy whispers a prayer to the sleep goddess Renin-Nutet, his words half swallowed by yawns. You close your eyes too, unsure whether to dream of onions or turtles, but certain that whatever comes, the earth will still be spinning, and the frogs will still be croaking, and somehow that's enough. The croaking of frogs fades behind you as you wander out from the farm village. Your linen tunic still damp from last night's dew. You've now had sleep in a temple, in a courtyard, and curled next to a hedgehog amulet. And still somehow your back is sending little complaints up and down your spine like an irate vizier dictating scrolls. Time to visit someone who might help with that. You're headed now into the world of ancient Egyptian medicine. Yes, the physicians, the ones who prescribe sleep and onions and lizard fat, often in the same sentence. It's going to be a journey of healing, of herbs, and of ancient ideas about why people can't sleep and what to do when your dreams turn from divine messages into midnight crocodile chases. You follow a winding alley to a low mud brick building with a carved wooden sign featuring the Eye of Horus and a sleepy-looking ibis. This, apparently, is the local SWNW, a healer trained in the temple schools of Heliopolis or Sais, now moonlighting as a sleep consultant before it was trendy. Inside, the air smells like crushed mint, cedar smoke, and slightly singed papyrus. A woman greets you with a knowing smile, waves you to sit, and begins poking gently at your temples with a bronze stick. Restless dreams, she asks, not waiting for an answer. Let me guess, you've been near a tamarisk tree again. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian medicine was surprisingly advanced. Physicians studied in institutions known as houses of life, which were often connected to temples. They understood the link between sleep and illness and believed that both physical and spiritual imbalances could cause disturbed rest. Remedies were recorded in detailed medical papyri, like the Ebers and Edwin Smith texts, which offer everything from laxatives to incantations for nightmares. The healer wraps a thin cord around your wrist, muttering a prayer to Isis, Al-Mawis. Your heart is too loud, she says, as if that's a common diagnosis, and you've got too much heat in the brain. You nod solemnly and avoid mentioning the barley beer from last night. Heat in the brain definitely sounds like a side effect. Time for the fringe tidbit. One prescription for insomnia involved pressing mashed onions, coriander, and honey into a ball, placing it under your tongue, and chanting the phrase, "Let sleep come like the moon over the flood." Does it work? Unclear. Is it sticky? Absolutely. She leads you to a sleeping mat in the next room and hands you a small bag filled with herbs, henna leaves, juniper berries, and what looks suspiciously like lizard scales. Sleep with this under your pillow, she advises. It will either give you peace or a very interesting dream about falcons. You decide you're okay with either outcome, but then comes a twist. This healer doesn't just prescribe herbs and hums, she also recommends dream interpretation. In fact, she keeps a dream journal, a literal scroll where past patients have logged their visions. You read a few. One man dreamed of his teeth falling out and was told to avoid fish for 7 days. Another dreamt of being chased by a donkey made of fire, and the healer suggested sleeping under a different star sign. Which brings us to your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether dream interpretation in ancient Egypt was taken more seriously than physical medicine. Some claim that the entire medical system was more symbolic than empirical, with rituals outweighing evidence. Others point out the surgical techniques, dental tools, and use of poultices that suggest a practical, results-driven approach. You lie back on the woven mat, herbal pouch tucked under your neck, and stare at the ceiling beams while the healer chants softly. She waves a small bundle of burning herbs, probably mint and sandalwood, around your feet. It tickles your nose but feels oddly calming. In this place, sleep isn't just rest, it's healing, prophecy, a nightly return to the divine. And while your eyelids droop, let's talk about their version of sleep disorders. If someone suffered from nightmares, it was believed they might be under attack by a demon or ghost, or just a jealous neighbor with strong incense. Cures included wearing protective amulets, bathing in cool lotus water, or asking a priest to inscribe spells on a piece of linen, which you then tied around your ankle. Modern sleepwear could never. You drift for a bit in that stuffy room, and somewhere between the humming and the smell of juniper, you think you see a black cat slip under the curtain. The healer nods toward it. "That's Bastet," she says. She watches over your dreams. You're not sure whether she's joking. Frankly, you're too relaxed to care. As evening slides in, you rise feeling, well, not cured, but perhaps understood. The healer offers you a final bit of advice. If you still can't sleep, try listening to the wind through a lotus field. Works better than any spell. You thank her, step into the street, and pause as a slow breeze passes by, carrying with it the scents of spice and ash. You walk now through quieter neighborhoods, where incense hangs thick in doorways and people whisper lullabies to restless children. You spot a man painting hieroglyphs by torchlight. Another stirs a pot of lentils while humming to himself. Even in a bustling city, the evening slows down like molasses, flowing gently towards sleep, and then, just before the stars reappear, you hear it faint, rhythmic drumming from a nearby shrine, night music, maybe a prayer to Hathor, goddess of joy and slumber. You follow the sound, thinking that if you can't sleep, to the wind in a lotus field, a good beat might do the trick, because here in Egypt, sleep isn't separated from life. It runs through it like the Nile itself, curving, unpredictable, and deeply sacred. You wake to the sound of sandals scuffing gently along a dusty path. It's morning again, and your back feels a little less cursed. That herbal bundle must have done something, or maybe it was the emotional support cat. Either way, you're up and moving again, this time toward a part of ancient Egypt that rarely gets sung about in lullabies work, because surprise people in history had jobs, even the sleepy ones. You pass a group of laborers heading toward the banks of the Nile, carrying baskets of mud and reeds, not glamorous, but important. You're about to dip into one of the more underappreciated causes of chronic sleeplessness in the ancient world: labor. Grueling, repetitive, sun-scorched labor. Let's start with your mainstream historical fact. Most people in ancient Egypt weren't pharaohs or priests. They were workers, farmers, builders, bakers, scribes. They lived in mud brick homes, woke before dawn, and often worked 12-hour days depending on the season. During flood season, things paused, nature forced rest. But otherwise, daily life was physical and exhausting. Sleep wasn't a luxury, it was an inevitability. You tag along with a fisherman pushing his tiny boat out onto the Nile. The air smells like wet reeds and sun-warmed clay. He's been up since before sunrise, casting nets and muttering to river gods. You ask him how he sleeps. He laughs and points to the back of his boat, a sack of straw and a woven blanket. When I can, where I can. You get the sense that sleep wasn't its own activity. It was woven into the in-betweens, between shifts, between chores, sometimes literally between flood cycles, in work camps where men carved stones for the pyramids or hauled limestone blocks for temples. Naps happened wherever shadows fell. The notion of a consistent 8-hour sleep window, adorable. And now, your quirky tidbit. In Deir el-Medina, the village where the workers who built royal tombs lived, archaeologists found satirical papyri complaining about lazy co-workers who napped too often. One even drew a man pretending to work while actually dozing in a basket. Apparently, workplace sleep shaming is older than office cubicles. You settle under a tree with a group of scribes taking their midday break. Their passing around a jug of beer water was often unsafe. So, yakikyo, cheers, and one is slumped gently against a basket of scrolls. He startles awake, mumbles something about Horus, and then goes back to napping. It's like an ancient open-plan office, complete with passive-aggressive yawns. Here's where historians disagree. Some argue that the laboring class had severely limited access to rest, with poor diets and rough sleeping conditions leading to chronic sleep deprivation. Others suggest that segmented sleep, 2 shorter periods broken by a midnight wake window, was common and culturally accepted, offering rest in small, steady bites. And let's not forget the seasonal aspect. The Egyptian calendar revolved around 3 cycles: Akhet, inundation; Peret, growth; and Shamu, harvest. During Akhet, fields flooded and farming paused, offering workers a rare opportunity to rest. Sleep during the season might have been longer, deeper, even celebrated. Imagine getting excited for annual nap month, bliss. You trail a young potter as she heads home from the kiln. Her hands are streaked with red clay, her sandals dusty. She talks about dreaming of jars, not metaphorically, literally jars. They fall, break, and reassemble in her dreams. She thinks this is a sign from Ta, the creator god. You don't argue, and here's a detail that might stick in your head like a papyrus splinter. Dreaming of your tools was often taken as a good omen. It meant you were devoted to your craft. One dream scroll describes a farmer dreaming of a plow that turns into a snake, which then transforms into a basket of dates. The interpretation: your work will feed you, but also bite if ignored. Ancient Egypt was really into poetic multitasking. As the sun begins to tip toward the west, you join a group gathered on the rooftop of their home. This is where many Egyptians slept, in the summer open-air rooftops, raised slightly for airflow, with just a mattress and a linen cover. They lie back under the stars, chatting softly about what they'll do tomorrow, what they saw at the market, which god might be annoyed today. Then they drift off, one by one. There's no anxiety about falling asleep fast, no TikTok scroll to delay it, just the rhythm of breath, of wind across clay walls, of sandals quietly descending stairs in the distance. You lie down too, next to a warm brick chimney, still radiating the day's heat. Someone nearby hums a lullaby, soft, slow, repetitive, It's about a crocodile who lost his way and had to ask the ibis for directions. You have questions, but they're not important right now. As sleep presses in, it occurs to you that ancient Egyptians may not have had blackout curtains or memory foam, but they did have routine, predictable rhythms, a life anchored by sunrises, meals, festivals, and floods. And in that rhythm, there was space, small, sacred pockets of time where the body could stop, the brain could float, and the world could fall quiet just long enough. Even if your mat was made of reeds and your alarm clock was a rooster who took his job too seriously, the sky dims again, pale lavender, melting into dusk as you rise from the rooftop mat. Brushing straw from your tunic, you feel almost rested. But that was just one class of sleepers. Now it's time to enter a far less dreamy chapter of the story, a side of Egyptian sleep you might not expect: punishment, prisons, and the weaponization of wakefulness. You follow the path toward a small, rarely talked about chamber near a fortress wall, one of the many holding cells for individuals awaiting judgment. Not death row, necessarily, but not a five-star inn either. It's cool in here, in that uncomfortable stone kind of way, and dark, like the Nile at night. There's a guard slouched in the corner, chewing on a stalk of something bitter-smelling. He looks bored, but he's very much awake, and that's the point. Your mainstream historical fact: ancient Egypt had a fairly robust legal system. There were courts, witnesses, judges, some lay people, some priestly. Petty crimes and civil disputes were handled at the local level, while more serious matters might be escalated to a vizier or even the pharaoh. The punishment often depended not just on the crime, but your class, gender, and this is important, how cooperative you were. Which brings us to our fringe detail: sleep was occasionally withheld as a form of control. Not quite torture in the chains and whips sense, though. Yes, those existed, but more like pressure. Detainees in state custody might be kept in brightly lit rooms, roused repeatedly by guards, or seated upright for long hours to encourage confession. You think you've had bad airport layovers? Try being nudged awake by a guy holding a reed cane. Historians still argue whether sleep deprivation was an official tactic sanctioned by Egyptian law or just something that evolved in practice, passed down as guardroom wisdom, like don't let them get too comfortable. Either way, it worked, or seemed to. You settle onto a cold bench next to a teenage scribe who's clearly exhausted. He stole a jar of wine from the temple, offering table something you're not supposed to do, even if the gods have had enough. He rubs his eyes and stares into space, not quite dreaming but definitely drifting. He mumbles that this is his second night without proper sleep. I confessed yesterday, he adds, but they're waiting to see if I change the story. Yikes. The guard wakes him with a sharp whistle. The boy startles, then sighs. He knows the drill. You step outside for some air, or what passes for it in a society where incense smoke, cooking fires, and animal smells all swirl together like an awkward perfume. Just beyond the prison wall, a line of laborers walks by carrying torches. You notice a few are wearing what looks like decorative rope around their arms. Not fashion, those are sleep-watching tools. They're night guards for a grain silo, and the ropes are used to tie their wrists to bells. If they nod off, the bell rings. Elegant in its cruelty, here's the irony: the people keeping others from sleep were often just as deprived. Guards rotated shifts in blocks of days, sometimes working 36-hour stretches with minimal rest, and they weren't exactly napping on memory foam. There are records of guards being punished, fined, or even beaten for falling asleep at their posts, especially in temples or royal estates. So they stayed alert however they could, chewing lotus seeds, rubbing their eyes with cold water, whispering prayers, or this one's a favorite, sitting on stools with rounded bottoms so that if they lean too far, they'd tip over. You stop to chat with an older woman selling sleep charms just outside the walls. She swears her amulets keep guards awake and prisoners asleep. just depends which way you hang them. She winks. The amulets are made from tiny stones shaped like the god best protector of sleep, women, and children, sometimes drawn with a drum, sometimes a knife, multi-purpose, like all good gods. While we're here, let's talk about those dreams again. Even in punishment, they mattered. Some prison guards were tasked not just with keeping watch, but with recording mutterings of the accused during sleep or near sleep. It was believed that the truth might slip out accidentally, especially if the person was under divine pressure. That phrase alone tells you a lot about Egyptian belief in sleep as a liminal state, halfway between human judgment and divine influence. See, but here's another debate historians can't quite agree on. Were Egyptian prisons genuinely widespread, or were most punishments carried out swiftly via fines, labor sentences, or public penance? Some argue that the entire concept of a long-term prison is a modern projection onto ancient systems. What we call cells may have simply been temporary holding rooms, not meant for weeks of stay, but for hours, maybe days, and sleeplessness. That was the point. If you weren't meant to be there long, they didn't want you to get too cozy. You crouch near a corner where a young man is scrawling something on the floor with a piece of brick. It's a symbol half eye, half sun. I dream of light, he says simply. He hasn't seen the sun in days. You offer him a dried fig from your pocket. He declines. If I sleep now, I won't wake up, he mutters. Not in a morbid way, more like someone who's afraid of what might arrive in his dreams. As the moon creeps higher, you walk away from the fortress, your feet heavy, your head foggy, not from lack of sleep, but from proximity to its absence. You can almost feel the brain static of a society that, while deeply spiritual, wasn't afraid to use the very thing it revered: dreams, night, rest as a form of leverage, of pressure, even punishment. And still, outside those thick walls, a breeze picks up. The stars wink behind palm trees. Somewhere nearby, a woman hums a lullaby to her child, rocking gently beside a hearth. The cruelty of wakefulness is always shadowed by the tenderness of sleep hovering close, waiting to return. You wonder, not for the first time, how many people in history never got enough sleep simply because someone decided they didn't deserve it. You stretch your arms, the air tinged with embers and the faint whiff of fish stew left too long on the fire. It's night again, but not the heavy, solemn kind found in courtrooms or prison cells. This time, you're drifting toward the ancient kitchens and dining spaces of Egypt, where food and sleep intertwined like grapevines on a trellis. Because while many things in history were complicated, this part is blissfully simple. What people ate affected how they slept. And for the Egyptians, that meant onions. So many onions. Let's ease in with your mainstream fact. Onions were not just a staple crop, they were sacred. Egyptians ate them raw, cooked, boiled, or preserved. They believed onions had magical properties. Thanks to their concentric rings, priests placed them in tombs, stuffed them into the eye sockets of mummies, and offered them to gods as breath fresheners, warding agents, and appetite suppressants. Basically, they were the garlic, Gatorade, and Gollum's ring of the ancient world all in one. But beyond their ceremonial uses, onions made frequent appearances on dinner plates, and those dinner plates often determined the kind of sleep someone had. High-carb diets bred. Lentils. Beer meant heavy, comatose-style slumber. Most of the lower classes lived on exactly this dense loaves made from barley or emmer wheat. Legumes stewed into porridge, and onions sprinkled like confetti over it all. Here's your quirky tidbit. Egyptians believed onions kept you from overheating during sleep. People would place sliced onions at the corners of their mats to draw out the heat. Some even tied them into little bundles and tucked them behind their ears before dozing off. Did it work? Hard to say, but their spouses probably had opinions. You walk now through a quiet marketplace being packed up for the night. The stalls smell of vinegar, honey, and roasted quail. A tired vendor waves to you, wrapping leftover bread in linen. He mutters that if he eats too much fish, he dreams of drowning. Too many dates, nightmares of sandstorms. He once tried skipping dinner entirely, hoping to see a god in his dreams. Instead, he just woke up angry. Historians still argue whether diet-based sleep rituals were based on trial and error or actual doctrine. Did people genuinely believe certain foods influenced dreams, or did they start saying it because enough folks had the same fishy nightmare? It's hard to tell where observation ends and myth begins, especially in a culture where dreams were seen as coded messages from the divine. You duck into a small home tucked between two larger structures. Inside, a woman is preparing a simple late meal, lentils and flatbread, with a drizzle of oil and a side of, yes, onions. She offers you a bite and you accept. It's bland but hearty. She talks about how her grandmother used to make a sleep syrup from dates and water lily petals. Very sweet, she says, made you forget your worries. You wonder if this is ancient NyQuil. Another woman chimes in, recalling how priests would sometimes prescribe specific diets to cure nightmares. Too many bad dreams lay off the fermented figs, trouble falling asleep. Try honey mixed with crushed lotus seeds, warm, not hot. You're halfway through imagining an ancient Egyptian sleep cafe when someone hands you a cup of thick, sweet beer. This will do it. They promise. Beer, of course, was everywhere, brewed daily, drunk by workers, nobles, even children. It was mildly alcoholic, nutrient-rich, and often used as payment. But perhaps more interesting, it was one of the few sleep aids accessible across class lines. Rich or poor, your last drink before bed might have been grainy, foamy, and vaguely sour. Sleepy, but not elegant. You step back outside just as a group of young men passes by, laughing and burping from their evening feast. One tosses a fig pit at your feet. Another jokes that onions are for old men and babies. You wonder aloud if they're not the same thing sometimes. They laugh harder, then break into a tuneless lullaby that names every food in their pantry, as if invoking edible spirits. It's weirdly comforting. You trail them for a bit, past a granary wall covered in painted symbols. One image shows a man asleep, surrounded by bread, fish, and grapes, with a goddess hovering over him. Scholars aren't sure what it means. Some say it's a reminder of offerings needed for a restful afterlife. Others think it's just an ancient sleep ad. Eat like this, dream like that. Speaking of dreams, there's another layer to this food-sleep connection vision quest. Ritual fasting wasn't uncommon. Certain priests and seers avoided food entirely before ceremonial slumber, hoping to receive clearer messages from gods or the dead. For some, hunger was a portal. For others, just a bad idea. You lie down near a quiet alleyway now, head pillowed on your arm. A pair of cats slink past, chasing a moth. Somewhere, someone is chopping onions, yes. Even now, the scent is sharp, earthy, almost sweet. You close your eyes and imagine it wafting through the centuries, from tomb to kitchen to temple, like a ghost spice that binds the living and the dreaming. Sleep in Egypt was never just biological, it was agricultural, spiritual, and deeply gustatory. Whether you fell asleep on a full stomach or an empty one, your dreams were flavored by what you ate. And in the world of ancient Egypt, even a slice of onion could carry a little magic. The breeze shifts slightly, carrying the scent of incense, and you find yourself stepping through a carved stone threshold into the twilight hush of a sacred chamber. Here, sleep becomes not just a necessity, but a celestial transaction. Welcome to the temples and tombs of ancient Egypt, the final resting grounds where sleep, eternal and otherwise, reached its most elaborate form. You glide past columns etched with stories, gods with falcon heads, rivers of stars, boats ferrying souls, and all of it orbiting one central idea that death was just a longer nap, and dreams were trial runs for what lay beyond. The Egyptians didn't just revere sleep, they ritualized it, named it, wrapped it in gold leaf, and prayed for it to last forever. Here's your mainstream fact. The ancient Egyptians viewed sleep and death as spiritual twins. The god of sleep, sometimes associated with Bes or even Osiris himself, was considered a guide between realms. You didn't just fall asleep, you journeyed. And just like with travel, preparation was key. Beds were positioned facing specific directions. Linen was chosen based on symbolic weight. Even the act of closing one's eyes could be a miniature version of entering the West, their euphemism for dying. That's why, in many tombs, the artwork shows the dead lying peacefully beneath stars or nestled in sacred beds. They're not suffering, they're resting eternally, or at least they hope to be. You reach a raised platform now, where a high priest once performed sleep rituals. In his hand, a fan, not the plastic kind, but a palm leaf wand, used to cool and coax the sleeping into deeper trance states. Think ASMR, circa 1300 BCE. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some mummified corpses were buried with sleep masks, cloth bands placed over the eyes. Scholars aren't totally sure why. Some think it was symbolic, meant to keep the spirit calm as it navigated the underworld. Others argue they were meant to block out light in the tombs in case the dead woke up. Yes, mildly alarming, but very considerate. Sleep rituals weren't just for the afterlife. Elite Egyptians often underwent temple sleep, a practice that involved fasting, bathing, and lying in sacred chambers to receive divine dreams. It wasn't exactly a spa getaway you might go in hoping for a cure to a disease or clarity on a problem. What you got instead was often vague. A hawk flapping in a blue cave, 3 lotus petals falling into sand. Good luck decoding that. Still, temple sleep attracted believers for centuries. And why not a place where the line between dreaming and divination blurred, very on brand for a civilization that embalmed its cats? You step now into a grand tomb. It's quiet, dusty, filled with the scent of old resin and stone. A figure lies on a stone slab, perfectly still, beside the body. Tiny statuettes representing servants in the afterlife. Tiny beds, tiny pillows, even tiny jars of, you guessed it, onions. Historians still argue whether the elaborate sleep symbolism in tombs reflected actual bedtime rituals of the living or if it was all metaphor. Did people really arrange their bedrooms like temples? Did they expect their nighttime dreams to shape their afterlife? Or was this all just stagecraft, comforting illusions to soothe the fear of death? Whatever the case, sleep in ancient Egypt was hardly just a biological reboot. It was sacred geography, a roadmap for eternity. Even in the simpler homes, people honored sleep with quiet reverence. Mothers hummed protective spells over their children before bed. Fathers placed amulets under mats to repel nightmares. Some families traced protective symbols, like the Eye of Horus, into the dust beside their sleeping spots, just in case. You find yourself now in one such home, a small space, the ceiling low. A boy sleeps on a woven mat, his arms curled beneath him, his breath steady. A lotus amulet rests on his chest. His mother watches for a moment, then extinguishes the oil lamp. Darkness, soft and absolute. Outside, the night sky stretches over the Nile like a vast velvet canopy. The stars shimmer faintly, tiny torchbearers, lighting the way for dreamers and wanderers, both alive and otherwise. Even now, thousands of years later, the echoes of those rituals linger in the way we read dreams, in the little things we do before bed, somewhere between brushing our teeth and setting an alarm. Maybe we're still trying to make peace with sleep's mystery. Maybe that's why we keep telling bedtime stories at all. You lie down once more beneath that enormous, ancient sky. No pillow, no mattress, just the cool earth beneath you and the collective sigh of history exhaling around you. Everything slows, even the air seems to soften. You breathe in, hold, exhale, you think about onions, beer, and boats to the afterlife, about sacred sleep masks and lotus syrups, about how people have always tried to fall asleep a little easier, dream a little clearer, wake a little more whole, and with that, we gently begin the wind down. The stars now blur slightly, just out of focus. You're not walking anymore. You're simply drifting like a boat set loose in the shallows. No need to row, no need to steer. The water knows the way. Your breath slows, your thoughts quiet. The cool hush of stone temples fades into the soft rustle of linen. Even the memories of chanting priests, of dream-healing rituals, of kitchen smells and market songs, they slip gently into the folds of your imagination, where dreams begin to stretch their legs. There's no rush now. The journey has been long, but not hurried. Every step has brought you here, to this moment of stillness. Outside, the wind hushes through ancient reeds. Inside you, a calm settles, like dust on warm stone. Let it settle, let it hold. And if a dream comes a strange one, wrapped in lotus petals and onion skins, welcome it with a smile. It's just the past saying goodnight.